know who I'm living for. I know.
Hi, and welcome to A Victorious Life, an outreach teaching ministry of the Shiloh Holiness Church located at 2419 North Glass Street in the beautiful city of Roses, Tyler, Texas. I'm your host, Lori Stimson Ortega, and as always, we want to say thank you for allowing us to come into your homes by way of VPN television and by way of the internet. We are in our 10th year of broadcasting, and we are so excited about what the Lord is doing. I do want to send a very special hello to a Mrs. Alice Wright of the Greater Tyler metropolitan area. That sounds kind of fancy. Greater Tyler metropolitan. Anyway, I said it the first time. To Mrs. Alice Wright. Alice Wright is one of the features for our The Voice newsletter was for April and for March and April. And we got such a positive feedback for March and April that we are going to leave it up just a little bit longer. We're not going to archive it. But Alice Wright is, she's going to come on the show maybe May or June, and we're going to talk to her about her ministry, the Widow's Mite Ministry, where she sends these proclaimers to missionaries in other countries so that the Bible can be recorded in their native language. So we wanted to send a very special hello to Mrs. Alice Wright. Now, I did receive, and incidentally, Mr. Cameraman, Miss Wright said that I touched my face. I touched my face like 15 times within 10 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So that's a lot of face touching, but so I shall try to work on that. But the next announcement I have, the Holy Ghost Gospel Temple, where Bishop Tennyson is the pastor on Highway 14. They will be holding their spring tea, which is Saturday, May 21st at 3:00 p.m. So for more information about that, please contact Pastor Tennyson or his wife, Sister Tennyson. And I don't feel compelled to give out their cell number. So call the church, because that'll be a hot mess if I gave out phone numbers. So those are the one hello, one announcement. Tuesday Bible study is still taking place at 411 West Front Street. Now let's go into the lesson. We are still in the book of Exodus, and I have really enjoyed teaching this lesson. I've gotten a little bit off because the past two tapes have been tapes of the Sunday service at the church location. And I do want to say this. We are not at the 411 West Front Street location on Sunday mornings. We are at the church, the 2419 North Glass Street location. The Tuesday Bible study takes place at a different location. It's more of a centralized area. It's on 411 West Front at the Lighthouse, and it's across the street from Path and in between Mazzio's and Wendy's. And we are still in the Tuesday Bible study. We are a lot farther along. We are on maybe chapters 7 or 8. So I got kind of thrown off when the cameraman said, well, the last time we taped a sit-down lesson for TV we're at chapter 4. I was kind of like, I feel so defeated. It seems like, I should be farther along. So, and on occasion, we will air the evangelistic side of the ministry, but most of the time we simply sit here and do the teaching. Now, we are going to start at Exodus chapter 4, where God is basically the Lord is talking to Moses, and we're going to pick up, it says, and Moses answered, chapter 4, verse 1, and Moses answered and said, but behold, they will not believe me, nor hearken unto my voice, for they will say, the Lord hath not appeared unto thee. And the Lord said unto him, what is that in thine hand? And he said, a rod. And he said, cast it on the ground. And he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses fled from before it. Now, I want to stop right there because we're going to move very quickly through chapter 4. We're just going to pull out the significant events of it. This first incident being, one, the casting down of the rod. Now, the significance of the rod turning into a serpent, it wasn't that wasn't done, again, haphazardly. The reason it turned into a serpent is because for the first 40 years of Moses' life, prior to his fleeing to the wilderness, he had been basically, as well as all of the other Egyptians and some of the Israelites, had been programmed to believe and to think that the Pharaoh was a God incarnate, that he had access, that he was a descendant of God, that he had access to divine power, divine authority, etc. So if you'll Google it and look at, again, Google images, type in pharaohs and headpiece, you'll be able to see at the top of those crowns or those headpieces, there's always a serpent or a cobra. Now, in Egyptian society and Egyptian culture, the snake or the serpent is attributed with wisdom and knowledge and life and death, and it's referred to as all knowing and all powerful. So the Pharaoh is sitting there with that snake or the cobra on his headpiece and holding different scepters with snakes and all those things. So those people, the people that he ruled, had come to associate Pharaoh's power with that of the serpent. Okay, so when God told Moses, ask him, hey, what's that in your hand? And Moses said, a rod, and he threw it down and it turned into a serpent. That was God's way of letting Moses know, hey, you're talking to the Lord. Okay, you're talking to the Lord God. You are talking you're not imagining this. You're not talking to your equal. That's why Moses ran, because his association with hearing the voice of God or the voice of the Lord, now he sees the manifestation of that voice commanding him to do something physically by throwing it down. It turns into a serpent. And at that moment, Moses knew, hey, I'm not schizophrenic. I'm not delusional. This is really happening. So that's one thing we have to realize. That is why God turned it into a serpent. It turned into a serpent. God wasn't doing anything haphazardly like today. God's not second guessing himself and miscalculating things. He is doing things for a specific reason. So then we get down to verse number 4. It says, and the Lord said unto Moses, put forth thine hand and take it by the tail. And he put forth his hand and caught it, and it became a rod in his hand. So God told Moses to pick up the very thing that he ran from. Okay, because notice in verse number 3, Moses fled. That means as soon as it turned into a snake, I'm inclined to believe maybe Moses was okay. But Moses fled. Okay, he fled. And then God tells him, hey, you know what? I want you to pick it up by the tail. Okay, now look, there's significance in that. The reason God told him, again, to pick it up by the tail is, first of all, Moses had to exercise his faith to believe that it would not hurt him, to believe and understand, hey, I can do this. And you know what? That was a farther indication that he was learning to hearken and understand and hear the voice of the Lord. It would also require him to be obedient. But you notice God didn't tell him to pick it up by the head. Okay. And the reason being, this is just my personal opinion. The reason being is, number one, he didn't want Moses to feel at any time that he had more power and more authority than him. Meaning God didn't want Moses to think that you take it by the head and you subdue it and you control it. No, because you know what? The Word of God tells us, the Bible tells us that the power that Moses was operating in and under, as with everybody else in the Bible. It was never their own power. They were simply vectors of the power of God. So Moses had to follow, to be obedient. He had to hearken and listen to the voice of the Lord. And then he had to be able to, of course, recognize it. He had to be able to listen, to hear it, to recognize, and then he had to be able to follow through. What is the follow through? The follow through is obedience. So God tells him to pick up the thing that he just ran from, and in his being obedient, it turns back into a rod. Now, what I thought was interesting, and we kind of touched bases with that the last time, we talked about the difference between a rod and a staff, and I thought that was very interesting in that it didn't turn, the word said it didn't turn into a staff. It turned it turned into a rod. Okay, so I thought that was kind of interesting, and the significance based on the two different meanings of those words, and based on not just the significance of the definitions, but the significance of what both of those things do. David in the 23rd Psalms, he said, "Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." So when you think about a shepherd's staff, it has like a crook on the end, and it's to isolate. If they want to pick up a lamb or a sheep or something, the hook allows for them to individually grab what they want, but it also allows for them to keep order, keep discipline from the standpoint, we'll say structure. Now, a rod is something totally different. A rod is used basically for correction. But when you think about rods from the other standpoint of the definition, a rod can also be used for measurement. A staff can mean a group of people. So now you have two different words that are being thrown out, but the symbolism behind both words and the definitions that we've come to understand, or how we've come to understand those definitions, are significant in our study of the scriptures. So then we get to verse number 5, and look what God does. God says that they may believe that the Lord God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob hath appeared unto thee. So God is saying, hey, I want you to show them this so that they will know you're not down here just on your own. And God reestablishes Moses is part of the mission. Moses is part of the storyline. Then we get to verse number 6, and evidently Moses was still kind of skeptical, because the Lord, he knows when our faith isn't where it needs to be. He knows when we're shaky or we're worried about things. So, and he knows when we need just a little bit more assistance to trigger our faith. So in verse number 6, he tells him, he says, "Put now thine hand into thy bosom." And he put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous as snow. And he said, "Put thine hand into thy bosom again." And he put his hand into his bosom again, and plucked it out of his bosom, and behold, it was turned again as his other flesh. So God tells him, basically what I'm about to do, stick your hand in your chest. When he under his cloak, when he pulls it out, it's leprous. But I want to bring your attention, or draw your attention to why he made it leprous. Just like with the serpent, this stuff was not done haphazardly. In the ancient world, leprosy was the equivalent to the modern day AIDS and cancer. Okay. Now, while cancer is not contagious, we'll just use AIDS. It was the equivalent to AIDS, but it operated like cancer. It was a silent killer. It was more silent than AIDS, okay, if I can say as such. So they believed in the ancient world, and in a lot of these underdeveloped nations, they still believe that if you have leprosy was an indication from a spiritual standpoint to other people that evidently you had angered the gods, or you had angered God. Okay, because it starts to eat it works its way from the inside, and then it slowly manifests itself on the outside. By the time somebody has become disfigured with leprosy, and contrary to popular belief, television, movies would have you think that people's like zombies, their thumbs are just popping off with leprosy. No, that's not how it works. What ends up happening, leprosy is an airborne bacteria that you take into the body. You cannot be born with leprosy. It's a disease that you ingest or you take in, and over time those fingers and those muscles, they start to, and those bones, they start to fuse together. So much so that if this is how a normal or regular hand looks after so many years of leprosy, it may look like this, not because the fingers have broken off, but because they've those muscles, that bone and all that, they've atrophied. So they start to shrivel, and it's very painful. So my point is, they thought that leprosy, or they attributed leprosy to some type of inward sin that was manifesting itself on the outside. That's why when we get to the New Testament and Jesus is touching, like he's healing the lepers, and everybody's like, oh my goodness, this man is around lepers. Doesn't he know that they had some type of sin? So that's what Moses had been programmed to think. So when God told him to put his hand inside of his cloak or his coat, and he pulls it out and it's leprous, then he puts it back in, then that was symbolism. That was symbolic, because God wanted Moses to understand in his own little way that sin does that to the life. You stick your hand, you've got a clean hand, you stick the hand in, you pull it out, and it reveals what's on the inside. So that's something that by the time we get to the New Testament, that is really why Jesus was saying to the people that he healed, and I remember the one man he healed in particular, he said, go and sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you. So he was showing here to Moses the condition, the spiritual condition of mankind, meaning, okay, put your hand in there. You look fine. You look okay. But you know what? If this were to come out all messed up, there's that inward side of you that nobody sees. So when the hand came out leprous, again, it was teaching him that the world and mankind was tainted, that only God could heal, only God could set free, only God could deliver. So he does those things, and he's serving as the catalyst for Moses' faith. He's trying to trigger that. And what I like about this story is its relevance in our modern day walk with Christ. Sometimes we need aids to help our faith. Okay, we need assistance in triggering our faith. Sometimes you need to get that telephone call or that letter or that news. You need to get that. Doesn't mean it's going to end that way. I can think of something that happened to us a few months ago, and I told a friend of mine, I said, this is just ridiculous. I found myself complaining, but then I said, I'm not going to worry about it. I said, because I thank the Lord. God is going to take care of this, and I thank him. I'm not going to get rattled. I'm not going to get upset. And it kept going on and on and on. And when it had escaped my mind, and I said, well, let me go check. And when I checked, it was kind of like still no word. And I checked back, and it was like, oh, don't worry about it. And you know what? But during that time, when it first happened, my first response was, oh my goodness, what now? What else? What more? But we have to understand, the people, the characters in the Bible were no different than you or I. They needed assistance to jumpstart and trigger their faith. Paul, when you're blind and he tells you, hey, go over to this person's house, it's going to take some faith for you to go and tell them who you are, then ask to be baptized. So that was something that as you're reading this in your personal study, I want you to think about that. Then we get to verse number 8, and look what God tells him. And it shall come to pass, if they will not believe thee, neither hearken to the voice of the first sign, that they will believe the voice of the latter sign. So really, he's given him two signs. He's given him the rod and he's given him the leprous hand. But look at what he says. If they don't believe those, they're definitely going to believe this one. And verse 9 says, and it shall come to pass, if they will not believe also these two signs, neither hearken unto thy voice, that thou shalt take of the water of the river and pour it upon the dry land, and the water which thou takest out of the river shall become blood upon the dry land. This last one required Moses to physically be in Egypt. So it required Moses to physically leave his father-in-law. It required him to step out on faith and to believe that the voice, to believe that the voice that he was hearing and hearkening to was the voice of the Lord. So he says, this last one, what God says for him to do is, you're going to take some water from the river. And it's going to be clear, it's going to be clean, but when you pour it on the dry land, it's going to turn into blood. There was no way for Moses to get water from the Nile River on the backside of the wilderness. So that's how you know he had to physically step into and walk into what the Lord was having for, what the Lord was planning for him. That means that Moses was physically going to have to exercise his faith. Now look at what happens, because God is showing Moses these things, and he gets to verse number 10, and he said and Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither heretofore nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant, but I am slow of speech and of a slow tongue. All of a sudden, Moses is now downplaying himself and his skills and his abilities. Now all of a sudden he can't talk. Now all of a sudden he's got all these issues. And you know what? This could not possibly have been true, okay, to the magnitude of how we see Hollywood portraying it. It could not have been true, because you remember Stephen says, before they stoned him, he began to speak about in the book of Acts the eloquence of Moses' speech, how he was a gifted orator and a gifted speaker. Another thing is, when you've got those people out there in the wilderness, 600,000 plus people, who do you think is going to sit up there and listen to you give commands by constantly stuttering? You know, now I'm not here to say that he didn't have a speech impediment. I'm not here to say that. What I'm here to say is, we have to be careful that when the Lord calls us to do certain things, that we don't downplay our skills and our abilities. When he calls us to do certain things and to step out on faith and walk into certain areas, or the areas he wants to enhance in our lives, how dare us present him with the negatives as to why he should not use us and why we are not eligible to be used by him? Because I think in verse number 11, that was an excellent rebuttal by the Lord, because it says, the Lord said unto him, who hath made man's mouth? And I'm just going to put it in my words. It was kind of like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Who made you? Who made you possible? So when he said to Moses, hey, you know what? Basically, who made your mouth? Now, if I want you to speak like, be an excellent orator, he can go in and do those things. But he's saying to him, or who maketh the dumb or deaf or the seeing or the blind? Have not I, the Lord? So God is saying, wait a minute. I am totally responsible for the human, not just the human anatomy, but the functionality of the human body. He's saying, hey, I created all of these things. I know how your lips work, how the tongue and the teeth helped for word pronunciation. So I know, and that's what he was saying. But after he put him in check, he goes to verse number 12, and he tells him, you know what? You go on and go. Okay. And he says, I'm going to be with your mouth. Meaning I'm going to it's going to be okay. I'm going to tell you what to say. I'm going to walk you through it. And he says, and teach thee what thou shalt say. God wasn't really concerned about Moses' ability, because you remember we said in the prior lessons, when Moses said, who am I? God said, It doesn't matter who you are. You tell them, I am that I am. So here's another indication that he began to walk in doubt. And he was basically saying, you know what? I can't do this because I just can't do it. I can't do this because I don't have this. I don't have that. And God wasn't concerned about that. And that's what we have to realize, that when he calls us to do bigger and greater things, it may not even be bigger or greater things. When he calls us into servitude, or he calls us to take us to the next level, we don't need, he knows us. We don't have to tell him our, like they say, the coming ins and going outs. He knows. He's God. He knows about your quick temper. He knows about your bad attitude. He knows about your confused mind and your misunderstanding. He also knows about your procrastination. And if he knows about those negative things, he also knows about the positives. He knows, hey, about aggressive personalities and long suffering and meek and shy. He knows about all of that. So I thought that was interesting. And felt led to say something about that because look at what Moses does again in verse 13. He says, "Oh my Lord, send, I pray thee, by the hand of," it says, "Now therefore," let me go back. "Now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say." And he said, "Oh my Lord, send, I pray thee, by the hand of him whom thou wilt send." It's like, good Lord, please, not me, anybody else but me. So that's what he's saying. And then look at what happens in verse number 14. "And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses." That means that God had to calm his own self down, because he didn't want to be upset and angry with Moses. He did not want to take his anger out on Moses. And he said, "Is not Aaron the Levite thy brother? I know that he can speak well, and also, behold, he cometh forth to meet thee, and when he seeth thee, he will be glad in his heart." Now, you know what? Here's a $100,000 question. How did Aaron get out of Egypt if he was a slave? Who gave him permission to leave? How did he end up on the backside of the desert? And in contact with his brother that he has not seen for going on 80 years. Okay, how did that happen? And you know what? That lets us know that God puts people in our lives to help us on our journey. We don't have to lack for anything, be it understanding, be it motivation. He puts people in our lives to assist us. He puts people in our lives to help us to fulfill the call and walk in the plan that he has in our lives. And you know what, or for our lives. And what's interesting to me is, we are not islands. You know, we're not islands at all. And if we're not careful, then we're going to treat each other like we are islands. We're going to, this is what I do, and I do this, and this is all I'm going to do. When God is saying, you know what, I want to take you to the next level, but there are some skills and some abilities that you don't have, that I want to partner you with this person so you can learn from them. They can mentor you. And when you think about your life, that's really how he does. He starts to connect different phases and stages of our lives, and different people are in our lives for different intervals. They're in our lives for different reasons and for different seasons. You know, there's a reason sometimes that people feel like, well, I've outgrown that person, I'm not going to be their friend anymore. Not saying you don't have to be their friend, you know, you shouldn't be their friend anymore. By all means, if they're not walking upright before the Lord, then, you know, you might want to rethink that. You know, we're not saying for you to ostracize or alienate yourself, but if sometimes you do outgrow people, and that's okay. Sometimes you do outgrow mentalities, locations, that's okay. Nobody's here to tell you you've got to stifle yourself, but what we're here to say is the reason if you're outgrowing individuals, if as a believer in Christ, he will always have somebody there to help you to go to the next level. You know, the Bible, if we say here, the Bible is something, you'll never master it, meaning you'll never know everything there is to know about the Bible. You may know Bible questions, Bible trivia, but those deeper revelations, you'll never really be able to master the Bible. And because of that, so too is our walk. We will never master our walk with Christ, meaning there will always be challenges. There will always be new adventures, new opportunities, new triumphs and all those things. So he says to him, he speaks to him about Aaron, and then Aaron, shows up, and they basically have a conversation. Then we hop down to verse number 17, and look what God tells Moses. He tells him, take that rod that you just threw down, and you're going to use that rod that you got over here in the backside of the wilderness. I'm going to use that, so that I want you to keep it, so that you can do the signs that I want you to do. Notice he didn't say signs, miracles, and wonders. At this particular point, he just used the word signs. And it was important for him to use the word signs, because signs are used to prove to people, or to show people, or to display. Now, when they got into the wilderness, God was really going to do miracles and wonders. He wasn't going to do any signs, because he did that while they were in Egypt. And when they got out of Egypt and at the Red Sea, that's when, after they crossed the Red Sea, that's when they transitioned into the miracle phase. What's a miracle? Manna, quails flying into nowhere, flying from out of nowhere, feeding, because y'all were complaining. Manna on the ground like dew. Those were miracles. So as they began to, and as we're going to discover, as they began to go through the wilderness, God began to meet their needs and reveal to them who he was based on where they were. And that's something we have to realize as we're going to get into in chapter 5. As God began to reveal more of who he was to Moses, then he began to take on those different names. Now, we hear people in a lot of the churches where, especially the African American churches, when they're preaching or exalting, they'll say, he's my Jehovah Jireh, my Jehovah Tiskanu, and Jehovah Shalom. They repeat all of those different names of God, and I'm curious to know, not saying you shouldn't do it, but it sounds really good, Mr. Cameron, on a microphone and with music and drum beats, and if the person is a good singer, sounds amazing. But we know we know God in all of those ways in one word: Jesus. Jesus is our peace, our provider, our way maker. One name to rule them all. Now, in the Old Testament, as we're going to see, as they experienced him, meaning God, as they experienced God, he began to say that they learned those different names. So then we get down here to verse number 18, where I thought it was kind of sorry of Moses myself. And I think we do this sometimes. It says, and Moses went and returned unto Jethro, his father-in-law, and said unto him, let me go, I pray thee, and return unto my brethren, which are in Egypt, and see whether they be yet alive. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. Now, you notice, Moses did not tell Jethro, I saw a burning bush. I saw a snake. My stick turned into a snake. My hand was leprous. He didn't tell him any. He didn't. Like the Jedi, it's like it never happened. He never said anything to Jethro about that. He used the excuse of going back to see if his brethren, those that were in Egypt, to see if they were still alive. Well, you just talked to Aaron, okay? So Aaron would have filled you in on all of this situation. Okay, he would have told you, yeah, Cousin Ray, he's gone. Grandmama and them, they gone. Such and such, you remember the lady lived around the corner, she's gone. He would have filled him in with those things. But look at what Moses did. Because Moses was still a little apprehensive, he was kind of deceptive with Jethro, because he didn't really want Jethro to know. And I think that's something that, while I'm not advocating for him not to have I think he should have been upfront with his father-in-law, said, hey, I just need to go back to Egypt and check on some things. I've been away for a while. I need to go and check. Instead of using an excuse or using, I want to go back to see who's still alive as a crutch to get back. Okay. But I do agree with him not telling Jethro all that he had seen in the wilderness with the snake, the burning bush, and the leprous hand. No, I would not advocate for him telling that to Jethro. And that's something that we have to learn. There needs to be consistency in our testimonies of faith. And I know y'all are going to email and call me about what I say now. So just hear me out before you start pressing speed dial. When I say, what I mean when I say consistencies in testimonies of faith, how can I say this without being rude? If you tell us, we can only agree with you in faith based on what you reveal to us. If you say to us, I'll talk to Mr. Cameraman. Mr. Cameraman, if you say to your local church, your local body of believers, I'm believing the Lord to send me a wife. Okay, I want to get married. I'm believing the Lord to send me a wife. And we say, okay, brother, we're going to be praying with you for that. And maybe we may jump the gun. Maybe we know people. And we start saying, ooh, because sometimes as women, that's what we do. We start, as soon as somebody say they want to get married, we go straight to contacts in our cell phones, and we see we try to remember who has a brother, who has a cousin, who has an uncle, who's a widow. Because, at a certain age, it happens. So maybe we find, a nice young lady, and we introduce the young lady to the cameraman, and maybe she's, nice lady, and they go to dinner or what have you, but it just doesn't connect, all right? For reasons unknown, it doesn't connect, not because he didn't want to put the time or the energy in, but because he's believing the Lord to send him a wife, all right? Now, we want to pray and believe with you, but be consistent in your testimony. If the next time you see us and you tell us you're getting married and we say, oh, where'd y'all meet? And you went to an online dating service, that's going to change the perception of your testimony to us. Am I making sense? Mm-hmm. Because it's not that there's anything wrong with you going on a online dating, Christian dating service. That's your business. That is your business. But if people are trying to let people know up front, hey, well, I just want y'all to be aware, I'm believing the Lord. I'm going to do this on my own. Like, on those game shows, Chuck, I'm going to go on my own. I ain't going to get quite. Because what ends up happening, your good ends up being evil spoken of. So sometimes it's not for you to tell everybody everything that the Lord has promised you and that he has told you that he's going to do in your life. Some people will say, the Lord told me that I'm going to pastor a big church. I'm going to have a mega church in the 903 area code. I'm not here to say that it can't happen, but ideally, God don't care about numbers. He makes numbers work. So when you keep projecting that, and if it's of God, it's going to happen. But if it's not, that's going to become a reproach against you as an individual, because you told us this was going to happen. You came in the name of the Lord, and you said that the Lord had done that. So I'm not here to say that God cannot do whatever it is he wants to do. He's God. I don't waste time trying to figure out which direction he's going in. What we're saying is, don't be like Moses. Don't. If you want the Lord to do something and he's told you to do something, embrace it, accept it. But on the flip side to that, be like Moses And don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't just tell every single thing, because sometimes when the Lord shows us things, it's over time periods. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen overnight. You know, a lot of ministries have kind of stopped, just given up, because the Lord told them. I know it was the Lord. He told me to go, and he told me to start. And we're not here to say that he hasn't told you to do that. But the first red flag, he told us people are coming from out of nowhere. It's going to be so packed, and we're going to have 3-4 services. You don't even have a building yet. Okay, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm just trying to say, hey, we live in a society where we feel like, we said this at prison today, we have nothing to prove to each other. We cannot allow for the secular, the mentality of secular society to have us thinking that how it gauges success is how we gauge success. Yes, you know, God makes numbers work, and numbers really don't matter to God, but they are important when you're looking for progress. So we're saying, don't be so quick. Help us to continue to believe and trust the Lord with you by not becoming don't be so quick to share. You know, if you're in your prayer closet, don't be so quick to come out and share all the stuff that the Lord told you. He could be teaching you some discipline. And look at what the Lord said unto Moses. And the Lord basically knew he was being deceptive, because God told him to go. He turns around and tells Jethro, I want to see if the brethren are still alive. And look what God did. God called him on it. In verse number 19, it said, Moses, and the Lord said unto Moses in Midian, go return unto Egypt, for all the men are dead which sought thy life. So he was basically saying, while you over there trying to run game with your father-in-law, look, you don't have to worry about that. You will be able to report to him, everybody that was after me, they're dead. So then we get to verse number 20, where verses 20 through verse number 25 is very, very crucial. Moses took his wife, who was a Midianite. She was a nun, wasn't Jewish or Hebrew. He took a Midianite wife, and he's been there long enough where he has sons, and he takes them, and they are heading en route to Egypt. And Moses has the rod in his hand. Look at verse number 21. So as they're journeying and traveling to Egypt, in direction to Egypt, look what the Lord says to Moses in 21. When thou goest to return into Egypt, see that thou do all those wonders before Pharaoh. So he's told Moses, you take the signs to the people. But those same signs are going to be wonders in front of Pharaoh. And I want you to hold that thought, because that's going to prove crucial on the day he shows up at court. And it says, which I have put in thine hand, but I will harden his heart, that he shall not let the people go. So look at what God is doing. God is giving Moses a heads up to let him know, you're going down there. You're going to ask him to let your people go, but he's not going to do it. So he's given him divine instructions, but he's also giving him divine preparation, so that he won't go down there and be like, Lord, I thought you said he was going to let him go. Then we get to verse number 22. And thou shalt say unto Pharaoh, thus said the Lord, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. And I say unto thee, let my son go, that he may serve me. And if thou refuse to let him go, behold, I will slay thy son, even thy firstborn. So you know what? When Pharaoh came up with I'm going to kill everybody, all the newborn males that had already been done by the Pharaoh before him, that was nothing new. Basically, what God was saying to him in verse number 23, if you don't let him go, I'm going to take retribution out on yours, because you took mine, 40 or 80 years ago. Okay, because Moses, when he's standing there, he's an old man by our standards. So that's something that I want you to think about, because this isn't new. God was saying, again, I'm going to avenge or take retribution on yours for the ones that you successfully slaughtered, the newborn males that you successfully slaughtered prior or during the birth of Moses. So that's where that came from. That didn't just come haphazardly. So when Pharaoh says, hey, this is what I'm going to do, this is a hardening of the heart, to where Pharaoh basically ushers in a curse on his own people and he releases and speaks the curse onto his own people. But it was already in the plans anyway. What God wanted, what God was going to do, God was going to do it anyway. He just allowed for Pharaoh, the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, to where, again, Pharaoh spoke it, and what God basically said to Moses, prepare your people because I am going to release death. So you best believe moving forward that even those who were that were Hebrews, if they didn't have the blood on the doorpost and all those things, their firstborn died as well. Okay, then we get down to verse number 24, and it says, and it came to pass by the way in the end that the Lord met him and sought to kill him. Now, this is where I've received a few calls and emails about this because this wasn't talking about God wanting to kill Pharaoh. This was talking about God wanted to literally kill Moses. And look at what happens. It says, then Zipporah, this is his wife. This is his, excuse me. This is his wife, Zipporah. It says, then Zipporah took a sharp stone and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at his feet and said, surely a bloody husband art thou to me. So he let him go. Then she said, a bloody husband thou art because of the circumcision. Now, I know this is confusing, and I know, we have to tread lightly because of the audience and because of the topic or what have you. So we're going to try to keep it as simple as possible, but please feel free to email, call me if you want more in-depth. But we do want to be mindful of the sensitivity of the particular topic, because what it's talking about is circumcision. Now, you remember in the book of Genesis, when God commanded Abraham to circumcise every male in his household. Now, God wasn't just telling him to do that just because he just wanted to see his dedication to him. No, because that's a very painful process. I understand, having never been through that, but I understand, based on, I guess people and reading different accounts of it and having cousins who are medical doctors, that is a very, that's a very painful procedure to have after you've reached a certain age. For a grown man to undergo that type of procedure, that's not something that's not it may be day surgery, but you're not going to be up and at 'em in a day based on your age. Now, the reason circumcision was important, the reason God wanted to kill him, is because that had been instituted from the time of Abraham. And here you had all those generations of people that were still circumcising their male children. And the reason they circumcised their male children was because that was something unique to serving God. That was something unique to being identified with the true and the living God, the God of Abraham. Because if Abraham commanded everyone in his household, every male in his household, to be circumcised, that means the slaves as well, then if he sold a slave to someone else, they would be able to say, hey, you must be, you was with that, your master just believed in one God, right? So then that slave would be able to attest to what God had done and how he had prospered, their master or what have you. So it was God's way. It was the covenant, not just between Abraham and God, but it was a covenant for all of his descendants, for them to be able to identify and to let other people know we are monotheistic. That means we serve a singular God. So here Moses is, He's out in the wilderness. He haven't thought about circumcision, but you understand he had to have been circumcised at birth. So the sufficient amount of time that had to happen, after he was 8 days old, because that's typically in Jewish households with their babies. That's when it takes place, especially for the Orthodox Jewish people. 8 days, it constitutes a new beginning, and also the covenant relationship that the Jewish people have with God. So Moses has these two sons, and evidently they were well over 8 days old. They were of age. So God met him in the way to let him know, wait a minute. You can't come at me any kind of way. I'm not going to accept anything. I'm not going to make exceptions for your family. So evidently, look at what happens. His wife, not his father-in-law, not his cousin, not his uncle, not anybody, not these concubine women or wayward women. His wife steps up and she says, okay, you know what? She took a stone and basically she circumcised their son, their eldest son. And that's why she said to him, surely a bloody husband art thou to me. So what she was doing was, when she circumcised their son and she threw it before his feet, what she was basically getting him and his whole household back in order with God. And you know what's also interesting about this? What's interesting is that from that moment on, she didn't go, and the kids, his sons, they didn't go into Egypt with Aaron and Moses. She went back to her father-in-law and she was within her right to do so. Number one, the child had to heal because he had to have been at a certain age, and it wasn't going to be compatible for him to be traveling. And number two, it wasn't in her best interest, and I don't think it was in God's plan for her to be down there, because if she was such a strong-willed woman like this, she may say, no, you can't go. Don't say that to him. God told you what, because y'all know how some of us are with these strong personalities. Sometimes we just look at y'all and y'all tell us stuff and we're like, okay. And we look at Mr. Cameron, you already know, we look at you. And then we may not say something right then, but when we're riding in the car, we're pretending like we're reading or looking at cell phones. And you said you're going to say, what? That don't make no sense. So we're all out of time, but we're going to pick. Well, actually, he says stretch it out. So we will. So let's go back to verse number 27. So 27 through 31, or 27 through 30, he sees Aaron and they go into Egypt, and the first place they go to is to the elders. Notice they didn't go straight to Pharaoh. We're going to get into that in chapter 5. They didn't go straight to Pharaoh. They went to the elders of the children of Israel, all of the religious and leaders of the house of Israel, okay, meaning the people as a whole. They went to the spiritual representation, and was to a certain extent the legal representation, the heads of all of those tribes, and they told them what the Lord had said to them, and he did the signs in the sight of the people, meaning the elders. And look at what happens. And the people believed. So when he told them and showed them what the Lord had said, they believed it. And they believed. Look, verse 31 is powerful. And the people believed. That means what he said and what he did, they believed. They took it in. They grabbed a hold to hope. Then it says, and when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel, and that he had looked upon their affliction, then they bowed their heads and worshiped. So this is where we see the beginning of them coming together as a unit. They are coming together. The Lord is operating his plan. So they've seen the signs, they have heard the word, and they have accepted the word, and now they're taking it in. And now that they're taking it in, they are in praise and worship mode. They're praising God for not allowing them to stay in this situation, and they're worshiping him, and they're worshiping him because he has not forgotten them. They're worshiping him because he has not failed them. So in my last X amount of minutes, I want to say, tune in on next Sunday. We're going to pick up at chapter 5. And as we always say, if you have Christ, you're already a winner. If you have the Spirit of the living God, you can face any challenge life throws your way. Check us out on the website. Also, check us out on YouTube, and come see us at 411 West Front Street on Tuesday night. God bless you. Until next time.
I know who I'm living